Hey there, hope you're doing well. Welcome to Snowpal Software Development and Architecture Podcast. In this podcast, we'll continue from where we left off in the Confluent Cloud series. So, this is podcast number 3 out of N. In the last one, we had actually produced messages using a Go client, and we looked at that. So, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you watch this after you've seen the first two, just so you get context to where we are at. Without further ado, let's just pick up from where we left off. We're going to start consuming the messages today. This is going to be, I reckon it's going to be a pretty quick podcast. The last one, we ran into some issues with producing these events and messages through the Go client. We sorted them out and we were able to successfully produce those messages. And this one, we'll just consume those messages, right? So that's all that we're going to do. So let me share my screen here. It's going to take a second to actually start sharing. Okay, I'm going to stop and try it again. Sometimes the tool actually takes a wee bit of time. It's still trying to share. Okay, I think there we go. Okay, you should be able to see my screen now. I'm going to, we were just look at this diagram really quick. We did a number of things in the last two podcasts. We produced the messages. Now I'm going to add one more to this, which is essentially the last part here. Consume record, or I believe the word record is used sort of interchangeably. So I'm going to say consume record or message. So let's do this. I'm going to go to my terminal. I have the command here to run the consumer, but before I'm running the consumer, but let's just take a quick look at the consumer code, the example that we got from Confluent Cloud. It's pretty straightforward. So let's go through that. The usage is we're going to call this this binary, and we're going to pass the config file path, which is getting started.properties, if you remember from the last sessions, right? We talked about the bootstrap servers, the username and password, and things in detail. Obviously, you don't want to share this with anybody. I'm just doing it for the podcast, and then I'm going to delete those API keys and everything. This is just for example. Otherwise, obviously, we're not going to, you don't want to share this with anyone. So we're going to pass the properties file. It reads the config. This code we've already seen. It's exactly the same as the producer. If you remember, the producer also read the config, so we don't need to go into the details there. What else does it have? So it sets a couple of things. It has a group ID. Let's look for this group ID in the producer. Okay, I don't believe this group ID is there anywhere else. So we can see if we need to set this group ID for it to work or not. We'll check that out. And then we have the topic. We subscribe. So this one, what is C, right? So we initialize the consumer. If you remember the producer, we initialize the producer using the config. We do something very similar. We initialize the consumer. And then on the consumer, we are subscribing to the topics. And then this topic is a singular topic that we are subscribing to. And what it does here, this one is using the Go construct of channels. If you don't know what it is, I highly recommend you look it up. It's very powerful. It's very Go specific. It's essentially saying it's going to continue to list. It's just an example. So you're going to continue to listen to messages that are coming in, and we're going to spit out those messages. It says here, read the message every so often, and then print out the message and the message details. Now, but if you want to get out of this, it just looks for the signal, an OS signal, say Control C, for instance, for us to kill the consumer. When that happens, it essentially ends this, terminates it, right? So we see this is an infinite loop, says run equals true. So it keeps going through, and the moment run is false, we exit out essentially, right? And then, we need to do some error handling and things of that nature. This example is pretty bare bones just to showcase what consuming, how we're going to consume these messages. So that's reasonably pretty straightforward. So let's actually start. We've run the consumer. I'm going to now publish some messages. I made some changes, so there's not n number of, I think there was like 10 or 15 by default. I trimmed it down to 3 messages. So we're going to publish the messages. There's one, two, three of them, so we should see something pop up here, but we don't. Okay, let's see what's going on here. So we produce the messages. Um, oh, hang on. This is writing to podcast topic B, and this one I think it's just the example in that code. I forgot to replace it. Purchases. Let me replace that, and then let's actually compile it. And wait for a few seconds. Okay, now we'll try to consume the messages. Should hopefully work. There we go. We see those three messages come through. Let's actually run them again. Run the producer again. We run it, and then the messages pop up here. And now if I do Control C, you see that it says caught signal interrupt. What is it? Yep, it's caught signal interrupt and it says terminating, and we are out of there, right? So that's as simple as that. Now, obviously, we can keep producing messages. The consumer does not have to be running. We produce 3, 6, and 9 messages, and now we run the consumer. Let's see what happens. We should actually see all of those 9 messages come through, right? That's basically it. Now, let's try a couple of things. I want to actually comment out the group ID. Let the offset be what it is right now. And I'm going to compile the consumer. I'm going to do a go build. Okay, it says required property group ID is not set. So it is a required property. I'm just wondering, I guess I'm trying to think, it was a couple of days back, but I don't think we set a group ID here when we actually published the message. Yeah, no, we didn't. I'm curious because typically I would have expected that we set the group ID on those messages, like in our read config here. Yeah, we don't actually set the. So let's do this. I'm just going to try what happens. I'm curious to see what happens here. I'm going to actually run the producer. Let's actually set it to 1. And this one is a different group ID. So let's compile let's compile the consumer. Producer as well. Okay. And we're going to, let me move this. Okay, we're going to produce the messages. That did not work. All right, so let's run the consumer. Okay, so let me actually change this. Let's try to build the producer again. That didn't work either. Now let's just go comment the group ID. Hang on, are we doing something wrong here? Have we run into a problem quite like the other day where things were a little bit flaky and then they fixed themselves? Because it just, as we know, this worked a moment ago. Only change I made was to the config to set the group ID, and I commented that out. Okay, let me for sanity 6 do this. Oops. Nope, the messages are not being produced one more time. That's interesting. What did we do differently? There should actually be no difference. Whatever it's worth, I'm just going to change this to an invalid property, invalid port number. So we've seen this inconsistencies along these lines. We saw them the other day as well. Let's go to um, actually I don't have the I'll have to go grab the header from someplace else like we did the last time. So I'm now gonna do that. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna compile it. Interesting. Let's go here. Let's make sure our cluster is actually running. PKC 1992 looks all right. Let's go to topics. Not that one, podcast topic B. Okay. This is where we are actually been posting and consuming it from. So I think it actually does all right to me. Back to the cluster settings. PKC PK11 XM US East 1 1992. Okay, let's see. Let's see if I'm recording. Yep, I am. That's good. Okay, let's try to debug this. So we were able to consume it with making no changes, and all that I did after that was added the group ID to the producer, and then we started having issues. Okay, and we've seen sort of. Actually, let me go to. Okay, no, I didn't have. I was trying to go to the doctor. Oh, you know what? I'm not actually doing anything with Docker. I forget. Not at least with this podcast. So we didn't touch the read config function, and we didn't touch this one either. This is very similar to what happened the other day. And if you recall, in the second podcast, had the second example, a slightly different producer example. We ran into a bunch of issues. We tried to switch to a different piece of code, and it didn't work either. And all that we did was switch back to the original code, recompiled, and things magically worked for inexplicable reasons. Okay, podcast topics. I'm going to do things here that shouldn't make any difference. Yeah, it's not producing these messages. How far does it even get? Let's print out. Let's debug and see. I don't want to print anything. Just say write config file. Oh, hang on. I have a mistake here. I've been building the producer with the consumer code. Oh my god, my apologies. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, that's a typo, obviously. Now let's build the producer. And then this side we have the, can we build the consumer correctly? And then let's publish it. Oh boy, it works. And we see the messages. My apologies there. It was a terrible typo. Okay, now I'm going to go to the producer, set the group ID. The message is published. and we see it come through here. I'm going to change the group ID. Okay, the message is published. Did it get it did get picked up. So the group ID for the producer is different from the group ID for the consumer. Conf.group ID, producer conf. Okay, let's look at, not expecting that. Kafka group ID. The group ID determines which consumers belong to which group. Setting a consumer determines what group a consumer belongs to, which has some major consequences. Detecting new data, work sharing, and fault tolerance. So here in this example is a bunch of consumer. It says, okay, the Kafka consumer, we know what that is. Group ID is associated through the broker with bits of information called offsets. Checking for new data. This command line. Group ID determines which consumers belong to which group. You can assign group IDs via configuration. You create the client. If there are 4 consumers with the same group ID assigned to the same topic, it will share the work of reading from that topic. Right. So in our case, the consumer actually does have, it has a different group ID, which means from a producer, maybe the group ID, I'm trying to think, Kafka group ID when sending message. Okay, oh, there's a long explanation. When consumers are part of the same consumer groups listening, each consumer will receive messages from one or more partitions, but not the same messages as other consumers. In this case, they have, if you want to produce or send message to a specific customer, another part, you have a topic or a specific number of partitions. Okay, so it's, it, I don't think you can actually restrict the group ID doesn't actually make clearly doesn't make any difference from a producer standpoint. So if you wanted to actually send messages, uh, so only certain consumers can pick up those messages, even though it's sent to the same topic. You probably have to do it slightly differently. Or there's, you could set these headers as well, and then your consumer can actually not deal with those messages, right? So that's I reckon that's how we want to deal with these group IDs. I'm just looking for another example that speaks to it. Consumers can join a group by using the same group ID. Yep, so the group ID is tied to the consumer. So you have multiple consumers with the same group ID, then they're all reacting to the message in the same fashion. So let's go look at this example. The maximum parallelism of a group is the number of consumers in that group. So you have multiple consumers listening to the same topic at on that same group ID. So what if I had multiple consumers that actually were listening to different group IDs? I'm just wondering, okay, now I can get rid of this from here. Let's go here. We've actually looked at consuming messages in this podcast. It's literally the objective of the podcast. Now I'm just sort of humoring myself here and checking out a couple of other things. Okay, now we have a consumer. So this consumer needs a group ID, and it's the default that just it says Kafka Go, getting some string here, the name of the the ID of that group. I want to create let's say multiple consumers. Oops. I'm gonna go here and call it consumer 2. This consumer 2 is going to send to a different group ID. Okay, let's compile consumer 1, and then let's call this consumer 2. I'm going to open a different tab. Okay, we're going to run consumer 1 in this on this tab, and then consumer 2 on this one. Okay, so this is a different consumer. So it's actually all of the messages that were read, had not been picked up by this consumer. So this consumer is now able to pick up all these previous messages. So I'm going to clear that. I want to clear this. I'm going to run the producer again. Sends 3 messages. We see 3 here, and we see 3 here as well. So even though they are 2 different groups. Now let's say I'm going to make them part of the same group. Oops. Okay, let's file consumer 2, run consumer 2. Let's clear this terminal. Let's produce the messages. Oh, sorry, I built them. I need to produce the messages. Okay, you see here, in this case, it's parallelism. So basically, there are 2 consumers listening to the same topic on the same group ID. So once the message got picked up by one consumer, it's not available to the other consumer. And who picks up? And it's literally, you'll see these. It's not going to be predictable here. Anybody who's available to pick up is going to pick up. Let's run this again. Okay, it's the same pattern we've seen. J Smith. That's the. How many are we sending here? I think we're producing like 3. Let's actually make this maybe 5. I'm going to run compile the producer again. Produce the messages. Okay, so we saw 2 and 3. Consumer 1 picked up 2. J Smith and another 1. Let's run this again. It's 2 and 3 again. Let's see. Let's try this again. It's interestingly. Yep, it's the same. I'm just wondering why. Okay, let's go one more. Let's do 7 messages. Two, and is it 5? Let's see. That's interesting. So the second consumer, for whatever reason, is picking up all of the other messages. I want to. Okay, let's keep going with 10. It's not exactly what I was expecting. Clear. Let's try it again. That's like 3, and then the rest. Let's do it again. 3 and the rest. 3 and the rest. So I'm trying to think here. Why is it? I mean, probably it's coincidentally consistent, is what I can imagine, because I don't expect for it to be. Interesting. Let's make it 15. Let's see what the split looks like here. That's 4 and 11. Okay, I'm going to create a third consumer to try and demystify this. Okay, okay, it's the same idea. I mean, I want to change anything, so we'll open another tab. Okay, we have 3 consumers now. We have 15 messages. Let's see. Okay, second one, the third one's not picking up anything. The second one is picking up 4. The first one's picking up the majority of the messages in this case. The same thing. Did I use something not quite right? That looks all right to me. So why is the third consumer not picking up any message? Okay, let's increase the number. Okay, it's 15, 5, and 0. Consumer. Okay, I'm going to kill like consumer number 2, then run this. Okay, now consumer 3 picked up the message. It's probably not enough messages. Let's see. Let's make this a bigger number. I don't know, like 50. That's 50 messages. There's a bunch here, nothing on 3. Interesting. Even though we have, let's make sure Kafka go getting started and go getting started. Yeah, I'm wondering whether there's other properties here that we could muck around with to see this difference. This seems a bit strange to me. Okay, now let's kill the first one, first consumer. Sure, then you have the second and third pickup. It's almost like, okay, now I run this. Yep, I still don't see the third one pick anything up. Okay, I'm gonna try, I don't know, 100 messages. And even now, third consumer isn't picking up any. Oh. What if it's a whopping 1,000 messages? Yep, not the third one. Let's see. Very interesting. Okay, I'm gonna kill all the consumers. Okay. It's actually 1,000 is one too many. Let's just go back to, and we'll go back to a reasonable number like 15. So we know what's going on here. We'll produce the messages. Oops, producer. Okay, we have 15 messages. All the consumers are dead. So let me run the first one or the third one. All of them got picked up. So there's nothing. Okay. Because it's the same group, the rest don't have any to act upon. I'm going to run this again. Well, hang on, how did we do this? I killed all of them. I ran. Yeah, I guess the last consumer, the one that comes into play the last, does not, in our cases, does not get any messages to be, doesn't have any to be consumed. Let's go here. This one's going to be empty. The other two are not. And we can prove that by, let's say, let's run this first, consumer 3 next, and then consumer 2 the last. And what's going to happen now is consumer 2 is not going to have any messages dequeued. 1 and 3 have it and 2 don't, right? So the last one doesn't. But I increase the number of messages, it doesn't seem to have made any difference. So I'm wondering if there's anything that's at the cluster level. Let's go back here. Let's go to the cluster. This is the cluster settings, capacity, okay, general identification, and okay, that's the cluster type. First 10 partitions is free in the basic plan. I'm going to go to the cluster overview. Actually, where is the... I don't know why this one's saying fail. That doesn't look right. 200,000 messages? That doesn't look right either. Okay. I know we ran into some issue getting this set up the first time around. Perhaps this connector is not coming into play. Forget the issue we resolved in the first podcast. Use records. There is another cluster. I'm just looking for the cluster settings here. This is topics. Okay, 6 partitions by default. Edit settings. Switch to expert mode now. Yeah, I didn't expect anything in here. Trying to understand why the third consumer is not actually coming into play. It's Kafka, Parallelism. Multiple consumers. Yeah, it depends on use case. How does calculate out beyond the number of partitions? But we don't have it beyond the number of partitions. We have like 6 partitions by default, but we have only like 3 consumers. How to parallelize? Okay, let's read through these questions. And there is a topic with 4 partitions and 2 consumers. We have 6 partitions and 3 consumers. Consumer A and B are already consuming with group ID blah. What if consumer B goes down? Okay, we'll assign all 4 partitions to consumer A. That's fine. We've seen that. What if consumers C and D start consuming the same group ID? There's 2 new consumers coming into play. Do rebalancing again. It will assign each consumer with 1 partition equally. So I don't think we're going to be reading anything differently here, to be honest. So I'm wondering whether it's just the sheer. Okay, I'm actually going to bump up the number of messages dramatically here. Let's call it 10,000 messages. Okay. I believe the second consumer is the one that came up the last. So, nope. It's pretty much divvied up between the 2 consumers that came into existence. The third one that came into being is not actually. That's quite. Yeah, that's a little bit intriguing, if you ask me to say the least. Don't figure this out in the next 10 minutes. I'm just going to end the podcast saying, not exactly sure why third one's not picking it up. So if you know why, just let me know. Yep, it's pretty consistent. It is actually divvied up between 2 consumers. Let's see, did we have anything to do with? Yeah, it says any partition, right? So we have 6 partitions. It's going to different partitions. In our producer, are we publishing? Yeah, we're not publishing the partition. Trying to think why it does not go to the third consumer. So the consumer that comes up the last, the third one, is not being sent any. It's not picking up any of the messages. Of course, when we kill one of them, now we'll see that this is divvied up between these 2 consumers, right? And then when this one goes down, send the message again. This picks up all the messages, and then we have bring the third one up, send the messages. That's going to be divvied up between those 2, and then we bring the consumer 1 as the first consumer. We're going to bring that one up, and we'll notice that that is not going to get any messages. Yep, so that's pretty consistent. Dig a little bit deeper. I'm trying to think why, but we have 6 partitions. It's being sent, as we saw in the previous podcast, randomly to any partition. I'm gonna try and comment this one out as well. Let's see if that makes any. Consumer, run it. Okay, compile 2, then run it, then compile 3, then run it. Now we send the message, produce. Yep, no, there's no difference there. I didn't expect that. So this is a different property, so I didn't expect it to actually make much difference, to be honest. Okay. Okay, cool. So we've seen that it's only getting picked up by two. Maybe when we come to the fourth podcast, we'll spend a little bit more time on this to see how this allocation works and how you can, balance your load and how you're consuming, how you're producing, and also predict, focus a little bit on how we can potentially consume these messages and do things in parallel with it actually showing up or evenly be spread out. What is this one? Rebalance. Provides a per subscribe rebalance event callback. Assign partitions. Yeah, don't think that makes sense. Okay, we will take a look at it. I promise in the next one. I think so. I think we did. Oh wow, I didn't realize it's like 40 minutes. Okay, cool. I think we consume messages. We made some changes to the client, Go client, and saw some differences. We stood up multiple consumers, killed one, ran the others, ran all of them in parallel, saw how messages got distributed, and so on and so forth. So I think at the end of the third podcast here, we've been able to get some feel for Confluent Cloud, where manage Kafka as a service. We created some messages. We published it through Postman in the first podcast. In the second one, we used a Go client to publish it. In the third one, we've used a Go client to actually consume the messages. So I think we're getting our feet wet more and more. Um, a lot of this is not specific to Confluent Cloud. It's just the fact that it's managed Kafka as a service versus you maintaining and running Kafka. The Kafka clusters either in a data center or outside of it being managed as a service through something like Confluent Cloud. I think with this, I think I'll end this particular podcast. Hope you had some learnings here. Check out our products and APIs. We have a number of products at Snowpal. The best place to start is just go to products.snowpal.com and look through a list of everything, our APIs, our apps and courses and whatnot. um, that's it. Talk to you soon. Thanks.